Hello. In this tutorial, we will focus on creating a video file using image sequences exported from Grasshopper. These image sequences could be using an animation plugin such as Horster, which we discussed in previous tutorial, or image sequences generated from a slider that was animated. If you followed my previous video focusing on creating a data plugin, which we live recorded using sound capture component in Firefly, we then provided a path for our camera, a path for our target, and we looked at how to plot the data while creating an animation. In that video, everything was driven by a slider which was determining the position of the camera, but also it was allowing us to plot data over time. So I'm going to move the slider, and not only we are moving our camera, our target, but we're also plotting our data one at a time. To produce an animation from this using the slider, we then right click on our slider, go to animate. Here we would determine a place for our animation to be stored. I'm going to browse, and on my desktop I would create a new folder called GH animation, which then I would reference. Okay, make sure that is the path. We would then change the extension of our file. Make sure that you do change the extension from bitmap to either JPEG or PNG. If this is for web, PNG would be better. And we do want to also change the size of the output. Now, if you do want to capture everything that you're seeing as is, you want to make sure that you click on our window, which would then sample the size of our window. In this case, that's what I'm seeing. We would be able to then crop this animation in After Effects, which is the software that we will be using for video compilation. And for frame count, I do want to create higher resolution. So I would create a frame count of 200. So you can decide after you perhaps do one, whether you want to increase this number or decrease this number. I would be using 200 for now, and I'm going to press OK. And we should start to see the data plugging. And this will take a while depending on the definitely number of slices or number of frames that you want to extract from the sequence. And what you are also observing is your Rhino environment working. So it gives you frame by frame. So it tells me in this case 60 something out of 200. So your Rhino window will keep you updated. My frame extraction was just completed. I will go to my desktop and check to make sure all the frames are extracted, and you want to always check to see that it generated the same number of frames that you wanted. So the number associated with the name of our image steels are very important. That's what we will be using to then create an animation. In this case, I'm using Adobe After Effects for generation of video. Adobe After Effects is part of Creative Adobe Suite, and if you have the whole Adobe Suite, then you would be able to download that. So Adobe Creative Cloud would allow you to log in. In this case, these are a few of the programs that I have downloaded: Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, After Effects, as well as Media Encoder, which I'll talk about a little bit. So once you are subscribed to this using your student account, you should be able to get a lower monthly rate. Or if you do not have Adobe Creative Cloud, you could definitely download a free trial, which would allow you to follow this tutorial. I do recommend working with Adobe After Effects above any other video editing software, as it would allow you to do a lot of the type of video editing that architecture videos are requiring. Similar to Adobe After Effects, you could use Adobe Premiere, or if you have another alternative editing environment, you could certainly use that. In this case, I would focus on Adobe After Effects. So when you launch Adobe After Effects, this program is a pretty heavy program. It does have a lot of functionalities and a lot of plugin and a lot of folders that it needs to connect to when it's launching. So therefore, it might take a few seconds for it to initiate. And just like any other Adobe software that you first launch, it would give you this pop-up window, whether you want to start a new project or if you want to work with something you already have. In this case, I would tell it that I want to create a new project. And part of what you're creating with a new project is a blank canvas that you're working with. Similar to Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator, first thing you want to set up is your environment. So in this case would be the size of the environment that we would be working with. And this environment in Adobe After Effects is called composition. So I would be going to my composition menu and click new composition or Control N. And here we can provide a name for it. And I could say, this is my Grasshopper animation composition. And part of this is the size of the composition that we want to set up. So the composition would eventually turn to a video. In this case, I have a preset here, 1920 by 1080. This is perhaps quite large for this composition. I would go with something smaller, such as 1280. And if you have your ratio locked, you should see that it does turn to 720. If that is not checked, check that. So then this way it would work with some default high resolution video ratios that we could work with. I'm going to keep my frame rate 29.97, depending on, let's say, the output, type of display you're using. Maybe this is something that you want to change, but for now, let's leave it as is. The other thing we could set up is the duration of our video. Here where it says duration, by default, it gives you 30 seconds. So the way it works from left to right, we have hour, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds, right? In this case, I'm going to make this shorter. I'm going to make it 10 seconds. So change that. And then the next thing is our background color. If you left click on that, you'll be able to select that. So I would keep it black for now. Okay, and press OK. And then what we do see here is our canvas environment. So I'm going to talk about different portions or different parts of Adobe After Effects. We have our, imagine this is similar to our properties tab in Rhino. We have our properties. We have our layer input. This is where we would bring in new material. We would bring in new material, but we don't have to necessarily use them. And what we will be using, you would drag on canvas. This is our canvas. And then we would see that in our timeline. So this is our timeline. This is the timeline for animation, and these are the layers that we're going to be using in our timeline. Then on the right side, we have some features that we would be using, such as text, such as playback, etc. Then on the top, definitely we have our menus. Then underneath, these are the functions that you would be using a lot. So first thing we want to do is for us to import our image sequence that we have created. So we're going to go to File, Import, and File, or Control I. So that's File, Import, File. Go to the folder that we stored our animation. In this case, it was in my desktop, and it was called G-Edge Animation. And click on the first one. As soon as you click on the first one, it recognizes that it's PNG, and also it recognizes that there are more files in this folder that not only have the same beginning, but their sequence is increasing. So then immediately it understands that it is a JPEG sequence. If you do not see this checked, make sure you check that, right? So this would then determine whether we are importing every single frame in our environment, or we want to package it already and import it as a JPEG sequence. And here I have the option whether I want to import it as footage, and every time that you are actually working with sequence, that option would be already preset. File name, I'm going to keep it as is, and I'm just going to tell it to import. So now I imported inside the layers. Imagine this is a repository of the assets that we would be using. If I extend the name here with my mouse, you'll see that the name is frame, which is what we call our files, and then it shows me its indexes from 0 to 200. So what that tells me is that all 200 of these are imported. Now I do not see the preview yet, and I do not see it on canvas here. So all you need to do is to just, with your left click, hold it down and drag it to your canvas. So we should see this appearing on your canvas. Now you could select this and move around, but when you first drag your canvas, it should snap to the middle. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to delete, drag, and it should snap to the middle. So you see that it's snapping to the middle. Great. Click out of your canvas. You can do that by clicking right outside. And now we see our layer appearing, and we have this thing called our timeline. You see this needle here? This would allow us to scrape through our animation. If you hold down your left mouse button and go forward, this way we can go forward in our animation. But what this tells me is that the sequence that we have created, it actually is less than 10 seconds. If you remember, initially when we set up our composition, it was 10 seconds. If I don't remember that, if I want to change that, I would go back to my composition menu, go down to where it says composition settings, or Control K, and that would open up this window again. So for instance here, I could say that, well, in my case, my composition maybe shouldn't be 10 seconds, it should be 8 seconds. So I would change that to 8 seconds. Okay, so my timeline was shortened. Again, depending on how many frames you extracted, you might want to extend that. Now, I'm able to scrape through this, but if I wanted to play with the proper speed, all you have to do is to take your needle to the beginning and press escape, and your animation would start to play. Great. And the needle goes, and then it's relooping, relooping, relooping. If for some reason you saw that when you're playing your animation, it's lagging a little bit, it might be due to its resolution. Maybe this is a heavy file for your computer. So then right underneath the canvas, we have the resolution of replay or the display. Drop down the menu, and I can change the resolution to half. So you can see that my preview changed slightly, but actually it would allow me to play this faster. So it's less processing for the computer. So often when you are creating the sequences, you know what the video looks like. You just want it to display with the rest of the sequences that you're setting up. So this could be a good option. If I want to stop the needle, I would press the spacebar again. Spacebar to start, and spacebar to stop it again. Okay, so 2 things here. I can move this. I'm going to go to the beginning. 2 things here. My video that I extracted from Grasshopper, it had the proportion of my my Rhino view. But in this case, I actually wanted to fill the dimension that I have. So I'm going to left click on the canvas area, and with my middle mouse button, I can zoom in and out. So this way you could see the boundary of your display. Then left click on your image sequence, hold down Shift, and similar to any other Adobe program, using your left mouse button, start to drag your image sequence out until you like what you're looking at. So in my case, I actually had a lot of white space or extra space on the left side. So first I'm going to make sure that its height is matching. Then I'm going to just move. In this case, I'm going to freehand it, move to the left as much as possible, right? And I'm going to replay this. So I see a little bit less. Maybe I want to continue this one more time. I don't want to see much of the top area until you like your composition. So this is similar to what you would be doing in Photoshop, in Illustrator. If you don't like the boundary, just make it the way that you like in the display window. All right, so that's much better right now. Maybe I want a little bit more of the top. Maybe I want to bring this down. So move this around until you like the composition. So this speed is just taking my 200 frames and remapping it to the frame rate, which was 29.97, right? So almost 30 frames per second. But maybe after looking at this, I want to show this in a presentation, and maybe I find it too fast or too slow for whatever I want to be creating. So this is where we would look at mapping time. I'm actually going to change the resolution so you guys could see the animation better. To be able to map time, I would want to change its temporal scale, my image sequence's temporal scale. So I would do that. I'm going to click out by right-clicking on my layer in my timeline and go to this option that says time. And there's a few ways we could do this. The best way is to go to this option called time stretch. And here I can either change the factor by percentage. So for instance, I want this to be 200 times faster, 200% faster, sorry. It's based on percentage, or 50%, right? Or in this case, I don't want to do it based on percentage, but my timeline is actually 8, which is about like a second and something less than what my actual footage is. So instead of it being, in this case, 6 seconds and 21 milliseconds, I would say, no, I just want to map it to be exactly 8 seconds. In this case, I would then change that to be exactly 8 seconds, right? So it's stretched just enough for it to be 8 seconds, so slightly slower, but it matches my timeline properly. Great. The other thing we could do in this case, we could fade our video sequence in a little bit. Because right now, imagine you want to present this, you want to create an introduction. So fading in is one option of doing that. Now, right next to our layer, we have this arrow drop-down menu. Left-click on that. Here we have our layer transformations. Left-click on that as well. And one of the options that we can create a transformation for is opacity. So all of these icons on the left side, we can keyframe, we can change its property. Right now, if I look at my opacity, it's at 100%, so I completely see my layer. What I want to do in this case is to key its opacity to go from 0 to 100. So I'm gonna make sure that my needle is right in the beginning. And I'm going to left click right in the middle of where it says opacity. And what it would create is a key. So key allows us to mark time in our timeline. And now that this key is activated, I'm going to change the opacity from 100 to 0 and then click out of it. What that does though, it creates 0 for transparency for everything else. Basically, I don't see anything. But what I want to do is I want it to go from 0 to 100. So while your key is activated for opacity, go forward a little bit. And I'm going to look at where I am in this case. This is in milliseconds. I'm going to go forward until about a minute into the sequence. Sorry, a second into the sequence. And I'm going to change this number to 100. Enter. So I went back to 100. So in this case, if I start this from the beginning, spacebar, it goes from 0 to 100. So that becomes a smooth way for you to fade in. And perhaps I want to do the same for my animation to fade out. While this is still activated, I would go to, in this case, 7 seconds. And I could always check the number here. I could either create another key by hitting this, so it creates another key for 100, or I'm going to select and delete the key. The keys that you're already creating, you can copy and paste them wherever your needle is. So my needle is at 7 seconds. I'm going to copy this key, which is 100% opacity. Control-C, Control-V, and that copied my key for 100, but I want to fade to 0. So then I'm going to come to the very beginning, Control-C, Control-V. So then it faded to 0. Now that we have our opacity, we would perhaps want to also add a text to the intro to tell people what we're doing. I'm going to close our transform tab, close my image sequence tab, and next thing we will do is we will look for our text icon, which is on the upper left side, horizontal type tool. If you hold down this arrow, you would be able to also access other functionalities inside each of them. For this, I'm going to go with the horizontal text. And as soon as you activate this icon, you should see the paragraph tools and character tools on the left side. We would adjust the position in a bit. Then just place your cursor and draw a text box and start to type something about this tutorial, about the sequence that you're creating. I'm going to say this is introduction to Grasshopper animation. And I could adjust the text box as you would do in any Adobe program here on the left side. I could change its position in the paragraph. So for instance, I wanted to be a center text, but because I already had this other window on the right side, it's difficult for me to access this. So I'm gonna click on the top window and you'll be able to adjust this. And as soon as you do that, you'll see that your paragraph and character setting is coming up, but also all of these windows, if you click on the details, you'll be able to close the panels. In this case, I'm only looking at paragraph and character. Let's change some of this text attributes, such as selecting a different font. I'm going to look for, let's go with the default Arial. We can change the size and go with a little bit, make this a little bit larger. And I'm going to select it first and then adjust its font size. And this setup is quite similar to what you would have to your other Adobe programs. So select that, go to a different font type, and click out of it. And I would also be able to move my text lower by going to my selection option and moving this down. If you ever see this, if you ever select anything and you do see this appearing, it's because you have your caps lock on. After Effects does not like it when you have your caps lock on and you're telling it to do an action, so make sure that you turn it off and that would go away. Right, so I have the text, and similar to our image sequence, I can open my text attributes, and here we could see that actually there's 2 layers of activity we could do to our text layer. One is the text option. So the text option, we will be working with attributes of text. So this would be similar to, let's say, in the way in After Effects, sorry, in Illustrator or Photoshop, you would create text along a path. But if I go to the transform, option, you would see that it has the same ones as we did with our frames. If I want to extend my layer area, I would drag this higher, open this, open transform, and you could see that under transform, we always have the same attributes. And let's say that in this case, I actually do want my text to appear and disappear where I'm fading in and out with the same sequence or with the same rate. So I would go to the beginning, and instead of resetting the opacity on its own, since I already have the opacity set up for my other layer, I could just click on opacity, and that would highlight the keyframes that are going along with my other image sequence, and I could copy this, so Control C, then I would come down to my opacity for my text, Control V, and you can see that it actually keyframes in the very same positions, right? So in this case, text appears and disappears with my video. Now this might be desired for a certain type of videos, but you can see that in this case, actually, that is a bit distracting because it is over my video, but also the color is not working with the background that I have. So then I can make some adjustments. So for instance, I could change the color of the text and move it maybe on the lower right side or the lower left side, or place it maybe on top, or I could do the opposite. So I could actually have it appear and it would perhaps disappear when I see the video working. So in that case, then I can start to play with these keyframes. So any of these keyframes, once you have them, you can select and delete, select and delete. So you only have 2 keyframes in the beginning, so it appears here, but maybe I want it to disappear. So I want it to appear and I want it to disappear. So in that case, then I would again turn my opacity back to 0. But in this case, I want to also change the rate of this appearing and disappearing. So perhaps instead of waiting a minute for it to appear, I would wait about 10 seconds for it to appear. So I would change my keyframe and take it back closer to my needle. If you wanted to snap to the needle, you would hold down Shift and snap. So now that's appearing much faster. And then perhaps when it gets to 20 milliseconds, it's disappearing. But just keep in mind that you want to give people some time for them to read your text. So that is going to be quite fast. So I would perhaps make it fade out around 110. That is still quite fast, and that should be enough for this video. In this case, I wanted to go back to 0. I can either keyframe it or just select my 0 keyframe, Control C, Control V, right? Last thing, I want to change the attributes of this text. So at this time, I don't really want to work with my frame, so I'm going to close this, go to my text, and again, change that here. So first I'm going to change the color of this. So something that maybe really stands out. Then I would change its position. So instead of maybe a long middle, I'll do a line left. And then I'll change the size again. So select it, go to size, and change it to something smaller, like perhaps 30 for this would work better. And then lastly, I would change its position. So I would use the select tool and drag my text wherever that works with your video. All right, so I'm going to play this again. Text appears and then disappears. All right, so Adobe After Effects has been introduced to a lot of architecture studios because of its capability for us to edit videos and present our projects, but this software is mainly used by special effects group and animators. So the features that we're using in After Effects are not even 1% of its capability. So if you're interested in more learning more features of After Effects, there's a very, very big community of After Effects video tutorials, and you want to be those specific in terms of what you're looking for, because this is a powerful tool, and you don't want to be carried away looking for the wrong tutorial. But the basic elements that we covered today should be enough for you to create representation videos for your studio. The last thing we want to do is to output our video. So in this case, I'm not going to be working with my layers. I would close this. So we would go back to our composition menu, and we would tell it to add to render queue. So that's under composition, add to render queue. And here it allows us to change the settings. And there are two information that we want to set up here. One is what is the type of video that we want to save it as, and then the second one is where do we want to save it to. So here under output module, left click on lossless. So here we can set up the type of video we want to save it as. Under format, AVI would work. This video would be quite large. Let's say we could do QuickTime, different types. But as you can imagine, even though this is a really powerful video editing software, but there's really not that many format options, and I'll explain why that is. Let's say for now I'm going to go with QuickTime. Here we can go to format options, and then we can look at more of its settings. There's endless videos about what is the best quality and what will make your videos more efficient. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but for now let's just output our first video. So I'm gonna just leave it as is, press OK. I have QuickTime selected, and all I need to do is to press OK. And then the output to, this is where you would save your animation to. And I'm gonna save it to my animation folder that I have here set up, save. And as soon as you do that, you have this option to render, and you have to hit that for it to start rendering. And as soon as it's done rendering, it'll make this sound, and you know it's done. Let's go check out our video. So this was a quite short video. It was about 8 seconds. It creates the video. And if I look at its properties, this is quite large for an 8-second video, right? So in my case, it's 87 megabytes. So this video is going to be very high res. I'm going to open it with VLC movie player. This video will be quite high res, but it's very, very large. And imagine if you have, like, let's say a 5-minute video, this would be in gigabytes. So rendering out of Adobe After Effects, it's not the best way to go. So I will show you an alternative way, which is the one that I'm using for rendering videos. And that's the one that is also encouraged to use Adobe After Effects. So instead of rendering this, and if I want to get out of this render queue, all I would do is I would just close the render queue option, and it would take me back to my timeline. So instead of that, you would need to be working with another program called Adobe Media Encoder. So when I was showing you the Adobe Creative Cloud, Adobe Media Encoder is another program which you could also download from Adobe website, and you can download the trial version. Now, there's a direct link created from After Effects to Media Encoder, and here with the same composition, I'm going to go to my composition menu, and instead of what we did before, which was add to render queue, we can tell it to add to media encoder queue. So what this would do, it would automatically call my media encoder, which is going to take a few seconds for it to launch, and it would automatically also send whichever let's say number of layers that I have in my timeline to be rendered in Adobe Media Encoder. So automatically it knows that you want to take what you have and render it in Adobe Media Encoder. So this would open, and the environment looks actually quite similar to Adobe After Effects. So I didn't open it myself. That allows us to just open the program. And if you wait a few seconds, we should see my video file appearing and ready to be rendered on the right side. Okay, here I see my video that is referenced here and is ready to be rendered. So a few things here, similar to Adobe After Effects render queue, we have to set up the type, but we also have to tell it where we want to save it to. So by default, this would create a folder in your user location on your computer. So if I click on this, I would be able to change where it's gonna save it to. Instead of a temporary place, I would save it to my GH animation folder, and here I can tell it what I want to call it, and I'm going to call it Grasshopper animation, and this is going to be from media encoder. Then what we want to also determine is the type of output that we want to create. If you scroll down, you'll see that this program, it has many more options than what we saw in After Effects. What's nice about this, I'm gonna hope that you guys see this on the lower left side here, is that it has some presets if you want to upload it to Vimeo and if you want to upload it to YouTube. So for the video tutorials that I'm creating, these are the presets that I set up. And I actually do like these settings more than any of the other ones that I've created, because it's quite sharp, it's good for web, and it's the right size. And let's go with the Vimeo settings. That's the one that I prefer. And you want to look for the right composition size. So in our case, our composition in After Effects was 1280 by 720. So I would be selecting that, and that is it. So go to on this upper right corner and press Start Queue, which would start the rendering. And this will take a few seconds. You should see the preview down here. And it's basically sending a call to Adobe After Effects, and it's going to render our video out. This video would be much smaller, and it would be as good of a quality as the QuickTime that we had. So you'll see that this is a quick process, and then after this, let's compare the file size, and we'll see that this is going to be much smaller. So I'll go back to my folder here and look at this file size. So this was 87 megabytes, and this is only 10.1 megabytes. And it is still going to have good quality. So I do recommend this for the type of animation outputs that you want to create, right? Especially if it's not something that's going to be projected on a very large screen. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And you can watch the previous tutorial if you want to look at the Grasshopper definition to create the specific composition. Thank you.